Good afternoon and welcome to our program today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Raleigh Flynn. I'm the president of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, a nonpartisan think tank based in Philadelphia, PA. I'm particularly thrilled about the program today. We're going to be talking about the Mekong River Basin, challenges, opportunities, roles for the United States. Having visited the Mekong River on multiple occasions, I have just a deep-seated interest in it, and it is unquestionably one of the most important rivers in Asia and one of the most important in the world in terms of its economic impact and cultural impact on the region. This morning, we're going to be talking about some of the recent developments on the river that have affected the environmental and biological impact and sustainability of the river, as well as, the economic aspects of the river. And we have a distinguished panel today who will be leading this discussion for us. Our moderator this morning is Major Ryan Ashley, who is a fellow in the Asia program at FPRI and an Air Force intelligence officer who's currently pursuing his PhD in public policy at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. Joining us also will be Mr. Brian Eiler, Dr. Kai Koga, and we have Apishai W. Shipper, who will also be talking about this topic this morning. Before we get started, I want to briefly thank our members and our supporters and any board members who are on this call. And I also want to do a quick shout out. We have a live event coming up on December 13th in Philadelphia. It's a lunchtime event. It's our annual Benjamin Franklin Award, which this year is going to be granted to Phoebe Novakovic, who is the chairman and CEO of General Dynamics, and she is going to be having a conversation with General H.R. McMaster, who's a member of FPRI's Board of Advisors, and they're going to be talking about national security and technology. It will be, I'm sure, a fascinating discussion, and there is still something magic about coming to live events. So there will be more information in the chat window on how to sign up and attend that event, and as well as on our website. So we'll also be sending around a feedback form afterwards. You probably have already received it. That's really, really important to us. I read every one of those and sometimes respond. So please do fill out the feedback. We take it seriously. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Ashley to take over the reins.
Thank you so much, Raleigh, and hi. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event today. As mentioned, my name is Ryan Ashley. I'm a fellow with the Asia program here at FPRI. Today, we're going to be discussing the Mekong River Basin, which is an important subregion in Southeast Asia, ranging from the Tibetan Plateau in China all the way to the southern tip of Vietnam. While the subregion has experienced profound economic growth in recent decades, this growth has been paired with ecological crises, mainly caused by damming and pollution in the river. So at this event, we'd like to ask a series of questions. What are these ecological crises occurring in the Mekong River Basin? How are partners and players in the region responding to these crises? And what can the United States do to credibly improve the Mekong River Basin? So to facilitate this discussion, we have three other highly distinguished speakers that I will be moderating a discussion between, who I'll introduce now in the order that they will be presenting some information. So first, we have Brian Eiler, who directs the Southeast Asia program and the Energy, Water, and Sustainability program at the Stimson Center. I'm sure many viewers here will also be familiar with his excellent, very germane book, Last Days of the Mighty Mekong, which addresses many of the issues we'll be discussing today. Next is Apishai Shipper, an adjunct professor at the Asia Studies program at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, and the Asia Regional Chair at the Foreign Service Institute at the U.S. Department of State. And then we have Kai Koga joining us all the way from Singapore. Thank you for dealing with the time zone difference there, who is an associate professor at the Public Policy and Global Affairs program at Nanyang Technological University. He's also a non-resident fellow at the National Bureau for Asia Research and a member of the Research Institute for Peace and Security in Japan. So thank you all three for joining us. Before we dive into today's topic, I wanted to remind the audience that we'll take questions about halfway through the program, about 30 minutes. So please submit your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat, but the Q&A box in advance. And thank you to all of the board members, supporters, and donors for FPRI in the audience. These events are free to you, but they're not free to us. So thank you for your support. And finally, I'll mention this again at the end, but we will be posting a recording of this event in the YouTube channel as mentioned before. So please tune into that if you miss any portion. So let's turn it over to our panelists. And I'd like to start, Brian, with you for an update on the first question, the state of affairs in the Mekong River subregion. One of your responsibilities at Stimson is co-leading the Mekong Dam Monitor. I think you have a presentation you'd like to show us, which shows some of the latest sort of information and conditions in the river. So what are the latest and greatest that all of us here should know about conditions in the river?
Thanks, Ryan. It's a real pleasure to be speaking with you all here today. Unfortunately, you're catching me a bit under the weather, so please do bear with me as we kind of set the scene for what some of the ecological issues are in the Mekong and what can be done about it. I've been working on the Mekong now for about 2 decades, and recently, with the support of the U.S. Department of State, Mekong-U.S. Partnership, over the last 3 years, we've been watching the river very closely via the Mekong Dam Monitor, which I'll talk about very soon. But just to hit one of the highlights of the Mekong's mighty ecosystem, the river system alone is the largest fishery in the world for a single river. It produces 20% of the world's freshwater fish catch. And when it's at its best, it will produce 2.6 million tons of fish out of the entirety of the river system. Most of that comes from the downstream, but it's important to kind of square that with what North America produces and all of its rivers and lakes combined. Canada, US, and Mexico, 13 times less than what the one single river system does that runs through China, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. It is indeed a mighty system, and much of that mightiness is driven by the animation that I have here that you're watching. This is the famous Mekong flood pulse, where in the lower floodplain in Cambodia, particularly around the Tonle Sap Lake during the summer months of the wet season, that lake expands to 5 times its size, more than 60 times the volume. The dry season goes into the river during the wet season, and water actually comes up from the Mekong mainstream into the Tonle Sap Lake. And this is partially what drives the amazing fishery of the Mekong system. Coming back into the dry season in the later months of the year, the lake contracts and the fish leave the river, the lake system, and migrate to spawn far upstream. So keeping the flood pulse healthy as a heartbeat or a key driver of the Mekong's productivity is of the utmost importance, because it has a significant transboundary significance, if you will. You can see here there are bags of fish being pulled out of the lake. Right now, this is the time for the famous dye fishery, or the bag net fishery, where tons of fish are pulled out with each bag. And this feeds the people of Cambodia with 70 to 80% of their animal protein intake. The entire population relies on the Mekong fishery, as does much of the other national populations of Mekong countries. The river system is also known for its giant fish. The world's largest fish was caught kind of in the upper right-hand corner of this map at Stung Treng, Cambodia. It's a giant stingray. I'm happy to say that both of these photos were captured by a USAID Wonders of the Mekong program, which is doing a lot to recognize and highlight the importance of the Mekong ecology and the Mekong system. But that flood pulse is changing. 2018 was the last time that we had a really good flood pulse. 2022 actually did have one. 2023 just came in below normal, but the 2019 and 2020 peak flood pulse maps show you how the pulse has suffered over the years, particularly in 2019. And this lack of expansion, the lack of the pulse, the lack of the heartbeat is caused both by climate impacts. During the wet season, there is less rain. There's greater climate variability during the wet season, and the impacts of upstream dams working together to reduce the flood pulse and the health of the Mekong system. One way that this can be seen as well with the impacts of dams is around where that giant stingray was caught. The flooded forest in Stung Treng, Cambodia is now flooded year-round. Typically, it's exposed during the dry season, giving these trees in the middle of the river system time to recover and to bud and to create leaves and make their ecosystem mighty. But because they're flooded year-round, as a result of dam releases upstream, they're dying, and there's a massive tree die-off in this one of the most important ecological parts of the river system. Fisheries are being reported to be down by 80%. The BBC last week just reported this. as a result of climate and dams. Recently, a WWF report suggested that 500,000 people in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam could lose their homes in the next 10 years as a result of a lack of sediment being delivered downstream. And that's also caused by upstream dams and sand mining in the river system. So what's the issue with dams? How many are there? A lot of you are familiar probably with mainstream Mekong dams, and that's what the map on the left shows us, that there are now 13 dams completed on the river system. 11 of the world's largest dams are in China. There is one more under construction in the downstream at Luang Prabang, catching a lot of news and controversy recently. But Laos has plans to build 8 more dams, to start construction of 8 more dams along its course of the river system. Cambodia has postponed its 2 large Mekong mainstream dams because it values the importance of the Mekong ecosystem and bakes that into its own conservation policy and energy policy as well. But what's often missing from a visualization and understanding of the river system is just how many dams are built on tributaries, and that's inclusive of hydropower dams and irrigation dams. There are already 400 dams built throughout the Mekong system, 120 in China alone on tributaries, 130 in Thailand. Laos alone has 100 dams either complete on tributaries or under construction. And so that's going to be baked into the Mekong system moving forward. To look at some of the specific dam impacts, we've developed the Mekong Dam Monitor, again, with the support of the U.S. Department of State. And this is an online platform available in all the languages of the Mekong, as well as English, to the entire public, that provides critical information about the impacts of dams to vulnerable communities and governments along the course of the Mekong. You can find it at monitor.mekongwater.org. What we do is we look at the 55 largest dams in the system. You can see how they are scattered throughout the basin. We're not just looking at China's large dam impacts, but also looking downstream in Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam, which actually has a lot of dams in its portions of the upstream of the Mekong. And we understand how these dams are bringing down that flood pulse, which is represented in that upper right map. That high wet season peak is what delivers the Mekong's mightiness. It makes it the world's largest freshwater fishery, as well as a robust agricultural zone for the countries of the Mekong and for export to the rest of the world. That bottom right graph shows you, compares the traditional pulse, or the mean flow line for history of the Mekong and the Golden Triangle in Thailand, versus a red line of average flow for the last 5 years, or 2017 through 2021. And you can see that river levels are higher during the dry season and lower during the wet season. And we believe this is from the impacts of dams, that flood pulse is now flatlining. It's essentially dead in the water. And many people along this portion of the river are now calling the river dead. But what's interesting is we're learning about how dams both struggle to survive their economic viability in the river system, as well as how they are impacting the river system. So in 2022, through the Mekong Dam Monitor, we were watching the largest dams. Here you can see the largest dams and their active storage. That's the amount of water that can be used for hydropower production over the course of a year. You see the 2 largest are in China, and they're huge by far. You have to add up many of the dams in Laos just to get close to the storage capacity of one of the dams in China. But interestingly, they did not fill to their full level during 2022. And this was a result of drought upstream. So there's climate variability in China as well, and this is affecting those reservoirs' ability to fill. And what that led to was lower hydropower production for China in 2022 and a more normal river flow, particularly in that Golden Triangle area of Thailand that I talked about before. So what the right graph is showing, again, is that light blue line is a normal low dry season, kind of falling down into the months of April and then kicking back up again to the wet season. The red line is that average, showing how river levels have been much, much higher during the recent era. But in 2023, there was a somewhat normal flood pulse. And we made this forecast early on, long before this this effect was shown in the data, to let downstream communities know that their river is going to be somewhat more normal this coming dry season. And this led to improved economic outcomes, a kind of a revisiting of socio and cultural rituals along the course of the river, and just a more normal course of the river. Now, you do see these ups and downs in that blue line, and that's a result of sudden releases and restrictions from those dams. And our team releases alerts, early warning alerts to those communities 2 to 5 days before those severe peaks and drops hit their part of the river. And this has also led to the saving of assets and an adaptation of livelihoods. Just to give you a feel, there's not much time left in my presentation, but for how the river changes year to year with its climate variability, the blue lines on these charts far downstream in Cambodia show what mean flow would be like, average flow. You see that normal peak during the wet season on the top graphs, as well as that lower kind of bottoming out and rising back up again during the dry season. On the top graphs, you can imagine that this is how the river would flow if at the top of each of those bars. So that was inclusive of the restrictions of dams. And we can see that the tops of those bars don't always get close to the mean flow line. And that tells us that climate is pushing those river flows down month to month. But what dam restrictions are doing is they're bringing the river down further. And the blue bars show you what the actual flow was. And we can understand that the difference is what dams restricted upstream. The dark blue or the maroon color are what China's dams are doing. And we find that China's dams are typically the most impactful, particularly in September 2021, when dams reduced flow far downstream to Cambodia by 13%. Those are China's dams alone, flow reduction of 13%. In the dry season, again, China's dams show up in the data. That's that purple bar that you see. This time it's raising the level of the river, sometimes doubling the river level far downstream in Cambodia. And the Golden Triangle in Thailand, China's dam releases for hydropower production can triple river flow. We're going to be coming out with an annual report that will further outline this data and provide you with more insight into that data coming soon about the specific impacts of dams. With the Mekong Dam Monitor, we're bringing about great change. I don't have time to go over all the outcomes, but we're making China a better partner in the region. We're changing PRC behavior. The PRC has now pledged to share dam operations data. And the reason why we launched the Mekong Dam Monitor is because the PRC and many of the downstream countries do not share information about their dams, about how those dams are operated. The PRC doesn't even let the downstream countries know when those dams go online or when they begin construction. We're getting official uptake of our early warning alerts in Thailand's Disaster Risk Management Agency. We're creating a sense of culture of the importance of data sharing and transparency among the Mekong River Commission. I hope we spend more time talking about the Mekong River Commission today. But importantly, the U.S. needs to keep engaged in the Mekong. I think this is a war legacy issue because those dams on those maps that I showed you, those dots were created by U.S. surveys during the Vietnam War. So we're part of this problem as well. But importantly, a food security crisis, particularly in Cambodia, could break out if there is a massive drop in the fish catch and a massive hit to the Cambodians' protein intake. And that could lead to deep poverty in Cambodia, massive outflow of people from Cambodia into Vietnam and Thailand, and cause many other issues. China is an upstream riparian, is eroding the sovereignty of the natural resource base of the downstream, and U.S. support can provide ballast to the downstream countries in their negotiations with China. And there's a lot of evidence that the U.S. support is doing this. I'm going to end my presentation here. I've gone a bit over, but thank you for your time and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say I'm always very impressed by the authoritative work coming out of your team at Stimson. So Professor Kolga, I'd like to move it over to you. So as we have all just seen, there's a series of multi-layered crises that are affecting the Mekong River Basin subregion. And I'm sure that the larger region in Southeast Asia and ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations as an organization, cares about this issue. So from your vantage point, what's the current state of play in the region on Mekong issues? What sort of leadership or initiatives are we seeing?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your introduction, dear Ryan. What I am going to do is I'm going through just quickly about the regional perspective on the Mekong River, and also particularly focusing on the Japan, how the Japan is actually engaging the Mekong region. As the Brian already kind of articulate the impact of the construction of dam on the Mekong ecological environment. But I guess the one thing like I would like to add is that the Mekong states in addition to the China, not like the they are actually pursuing their own kind of interest to generate hydropower, and also that actually creates the coordination program and a cooperation program too. So what they actually started to do is they started to actually create the certain kind of institutions, including the Mekong River Commission, MRC, which was created in the 1995. And then also more recently, there are several new institutions, such as the Lancang Mekong Corporation, organized by the China, headed by China with the other the Mekong regional states. And then also the United States actually created the Mekong-US partnership on the basis of the Lower Mekong Initiative that the United States took in 2009. Japan also tried to kind of make the certain initiative from 2008, creating the Mekong-Japan Cooperation, and so on and so forth. So I guess there are several institutional frameworks that we could use to coordinate and facilitate cooperation between the Mekong regional states, and also try to mitigate the risk of the ecological risk in the region. But then I think the issue here, there are certain kind of like the several issues. The first one is the institutional issue, that is the pretty much the framework is congested. I mean, cooperative frameworks are congested, and then there are several the institutions that do not necessarily cooperate with each other or coordinate their kind of mechanism each other. Right now, as the Brian articulate or like pointed out, the MRC, the Mekong Regional Commission, and then the Lancang Mekong cooperative framework actually share the certain kind of the data for the water management. But then it was just kind of beginning, and then they were more kind of focused on the hydropolitics or the water management. So that like the other kind of issues such as agricultural, environment, energy security, those are not necessarily dealt by those the frameworks. So there are more kind of the things to be done for the coordinating the coordination, and then also the economic issue, right? I guess if you take a look at the GDP of those kind of Mekong regional states, then they are pretty low, and then they are actually regarded as the developing countries, which is which requires more kind of development programs. So and then this has the implication for the regional integration or regional cooperation in Southeast Asia as well. ASEAN's one of the biggest program in the ASEAN is that the ASEAN has the wide the range of the development level in terms of the economics and the social economic stability, the political stability, and so on and so forth. So in order to fill this gap, they actually need more the cooperation or like assistance from the within and then outside the ASEAN or like regional states. So that is the one important issue. And then you have to strike the balance between how we gonna actually develop without actually risking the environment, the degradation in the region. And then also there are the geopolitical risks, of course. China is having more kind of the engagement in the region, and then the United States was actually concerned about and also like US allies and then partners were concerned about the increasing the influence in the region as well. So the risk is that I mean, if that's the kind of like the healthy the competition, that's okay. But then if they actually focus too much on the geopolitical implications, then they would actually compete for the sake of competition, and then not like really thinking about the Mekong kind of like regional the cooperation or like environmental stability. So these are the something that we probably like need to actually think about. And then the outside external actors kind of role Japan. Japan has been thinking about engaging the Mekong region for a long time. It actually started off from the 1990s when the stability in the Indochina states actually became more stable. And then the Japan was at first like thinking about the economic development and economic opportunities there. So they actually started to invest a lot by interacting with the Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and also the Myanmar as well. In early 2000, Japan actually created a framework called the Japan CLV, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam Development Cooperation Framework. And then they started to have the more kind of economic support, try to facilitate the economic development in those the countries. And then also from the 2007, Japan started to use the create a framework called the Japan Mekong cooperation. And each year they started to have the summit and foreign ministers meeting to kind of coordinate the policy in the development, and also again like the mitigate the risk of the environmental degradation, and then also the political stability and so on and so forth. So it actually started pretty well, and then Japan's kind of engagement was consistent, and then it didn't actually go for the kind of the geopolitical implication for that. But at the same time, there were certain kind of like the disruptions in the recent years, which was the COVID-19. The COVID-19 actually created the diplomatic hiatus between the Japan and the Mekong regional states, so that they started not to have the summit or foreign ministers meeting. That actually creates a certain the gap in the coordination. And also, in addition to that, the 2021 Myanmar coup happened, and then the Japan has kind of difficulty in how to engage the Mekong region, because the Myanmar was one of the member of the Japan Mekong Cooperation. But then if you interact with those Myanmar junta, then that means Japan is kind of legitimizing the regime. That is not actually Japan really wants to pursue. So in that sense, Japan has difficulty right now in cooperating with the Mekong regional states. What they do is they actually engage bilaterally, and also they are using some of the institutions made by the Southeast Asia, such as the ACMEX, that is the Wadi Chopra Mekong the Economic Cooperation Strategy Framework, and so that they could actually defer their kind of the support the cooperative initiative made by the regional states. So those are something that like Japan is engaging. And then for ASEAN, ASEAN is some of the ASEAN member states were concerned about the regional the Mekong sub-regions, but at the same time they are not necessarily the high priority compared with other issues such as South China Sea and so on and so forth. So the ASEAN is concerned, but they actually defer those issues to the more kind of sub-regional institutions. And then, but probably I think there are more opportunities for ASEAN to take an initiative, and particularly because ASEAN has the linkage with the external actors, including the United States, Japan, South Korea, Australia, then China, of course, so that they could actually coordinate some of the forums to kind of discuss or at least like share their information to facilitate the cooperation there. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I hope that we'll get to discuss opportunities for ASEAN's leadership as we continue in our conversation here. I'd like to bring in Apichai Shipper. So as we've heard, this is a region with multi-layered problems, meeting geopolitical tensions, meeting a very congested and sometimes inconsistent institutional environment. But the Mekong subregion seems like a region that is ripe for what's called minilateralism, select groups of countries working together, collaborating on specific issues. So what is your view on the potential for future minilateral cooperation in the Mekong subregion? Is this an area for growth? How do you project things?
Yeah, thank you, Ryan, for that question. I want to make this short and sweet because we want to probably answer questions as well. But before I start, I just want to first thank the Foreign Policy Research Institute for the kind invitation. And I also have to mention, since I'm also a State Department official, but today I'm actually speaking in my private capacity as Georgetown professor. And therefore, the views that I present today is all that of mine and not of the State Department or U.S. government. So Koga Sensei actually had listed some of these minilateral institutions, 4 of them, major one, Mekong River Commission, the Lansang Mekong Corporation, the Greater Mekong Subregion Japan Partnership, and the Mekong U.S. Partnership. This one also, I want to just add one more, and that's the Mekong Republic of Korea Strategic Partnership that also started also in 2019. So the central question then is, why do we see so many of these minilateral institutions? So why minilateralism we are seeing in the case of Southeast Asia? So I believe that minilateralism brings to the table the smallest possible number of countries needed to have the largest possible impact on solving a particular problem. It addresses specific threat, contingencies, or security issues with much fewer states in multilateral organization who share the same interests for urgently resolving the problem within a finite period of time. Minilateralism allows for immediate response to urgent regional problems with ease and simplicity, with or without formal treaties, while the commitments of the critical mass of members are voluntary or non-binding in nature. So simply put, there are a small number of people. There are very focused in terms of the problem they want to be resolved, and is it informal? And by taking a more targeted approach, informal unilateralism has outperformed formal multilateralism to achieve regional cooperation on the most pertinent issue facing the international community. That's my personal opinion. And this is because these minilateral platforms or mini alliances of like-minded networks were created to solve specific regional problems through coalitions of countries working together on shared objectives. And Asian policymakers themselves have recognized that minilateralism outperforms both bilateralism and multilateralism at solving problems. So minilateralism empowers medium powers with more leverage in negotiations, and that small and medium Asian countries want to be in control of their own destiny and leverage against global powers rather than operating through institutions that are controlled by the US or by the PRC. So what then can the United States do and can do further? Again, this is like my personal views. I'm sure we're gonna have questions from the audience on what USG is doing. So to answer that question, I actually have a colleague of mine who is the Mekong officer from the State Department, and they can answer that question directly. But let me just give you my personal opinion as a scholar on what can the US do. So as new unilateral institutions and policies are being formed in the region, the US government has begun to participate more actively because it has capacity to engage bilaterally, multilaterally, and minilaterally. So I believe that you begin to see increasingly that many of the US government officials will use the term minilateralism or minilateral institutions more so as time goes by. And personally, I think Washington should deepen our understanding on what lower Mekong countries want. The PRC, Japan, the Republic of Korea have done that effectively. And together with the private sector, like the Tibetan Center, Brian's Center, Washington has helped to develop an online platform for monitoring of dams and environment impacts in the Mekong Basin, to provide time series data with satellite images of the river flows, to provide technical expertise on cost estimates of dam construction, as Brian also mentioned, together with USAID, and more. Perhaps additional assistance, in my humble opinion, to that the U.S. government can do to the lower Mekong countries, maybe including providing necessary disaster response equipment during a river's emergency. And this is an area where the U.S. has expertise and comparative advantage. So what we've seen actually, what these the PRC, what Japan, and what the Republic of Korea is doing, is actually they're providing a lot of these assistance that where the countries have comparative advantage, and U.S. here has also has a comparative advantage on this particular area. So I think then Washington then need to raise this priority higher in its list for building relation with the 5 lower Mekong countries, that is Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos, and Cambodia. And I will stop there for question and answers. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And let's move on to the question and answer portion. And I have a question here from Sam, who's in the audience, which is along the lines of everything that we just discussed. And Sam would like to ask, is this an area for potential US-China cooperation? Is this a place where the world's 2 largest economies can work together to create better outcomes? So I'll toss this out to any participant that would like to answer the question. There might be a bit of a tension here, right? Is the correct solution encouraging this mini-lateralism from regional countries, or is there a leadership vacuum that needs to be filled by the United States, China, or both? So I think Brian, did you raise your hand to answer this question?
Sure.
How do you feel about the potential tension there between the superpower dynamics and the regional dynamics?
So I'm really interested in Kei Koga's answer to this as someone who's not an American, not a Southeast Asian, working in Southeast Asia, thinking about the potential of the U.S. and China collaborating. I think the answer is unlikely. And it's not for lack of potential interest between the U.S. and China. It's that the Southeast Asian countries prefer healthy competition between the 2 growing superpowers, or the 2 large superpowers. And in that sense, if there's healthy competition, the countries of the Mekong can take advantage of an existing culture of balancing and hedging, balancing their relations with the 2 countries, taking from this country when it's beneficial, taking from that country when it's beneficial in terms of policy and programmatic interventions, development of relations. And with that, you can get a kind of a virtuous circle running of healthy competition that Apichai mentioned. What the countries don't want, though, is they probably wouldn't want to have the U.S. and China collaborating together over top of them in a kind of grand bargain, if you will, that leaves the countries marginalized as far as their participation and how the U.S. and China would engage. And on the other end of that, forcing the countries to pick sides ultimately is what the countries of Southeast Asia do not want, because there are many lessons out there that show when countries do pick sides, they often fail. I mean, that's the story of the Khmer Rouge. That's the story of South Vietnam, 2 regimes which are no longer around. So I'll end there and see what other colleagues have to answer on this.
Yes, Koga-sensei, please. I would like to hear your thoughts on this.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. So I actually basically agree with what just Brian said, and then so Southeast Asia wants to have the healthy competition between China and then the United States, because in under the healthy competition, then Southeast Asia is attractive, right? Because the United States wants to engage with Southeast Asia, China wants to engage with Southeast Asia, and they are competing over how they could actually provide the public goods. So in that sense, the Mekong River can be one of the issues that they could actually utilize for getting more kind of assistance from that. I guess it's right now, like considering the current situation between the United States and then China, it's really I agree, it's really unlikely that like they could actually have the tangible cooperation over the Mekong River. But like, I guess the one thing like probably like just kind of like the first step they could do is I'm always wondering, like the United States has the framework for the Friends of the Mekong. That is the United States invites the Mekong regional states and also some of the regional states such as Japan, Australia, the South Korea to cooperate or like the coordinate or share the information about what they are doing for the development and then also the environmental the protection. So why not? Like they could actually invite the China to that, and so that like they could actually share the information there. I don't think the friend of Mekong is really vital or like it's more like kind of like how do I say, like informal framework that they could actually that talk more kind of each other rather freely, I guess. So I think like that's kind of one step that the United States might take. So that's just kind of my perspective. Thank you.
So Apichai, how do you feel that this conversation that you just heard aligns with your own views on the importance of unilateralism here? Do you think this is compatible, or do you think that this is a tension that needs to be overcome?
So let me just give you my own view, and then I would actually ask maybe Lonnie if you can step in and can give the U.S. government view on this. But my own view on, I guess the question here is, how could U.S. government further develop and capitalize on the opportunity for collaboration, right? So we are working on assumption that there need to be collaborated, and I mentioned before that we have the Mekong U.S. partnership. And the U.S. government is trying to strengthen that partnership, and this could be a unilateral institution. Right, we're not talking about bilateral institutions. We actually have U.S. partnership with which all of these lower Mekong countries. And I just also just mentioned to you how the U.S. can prioritize, can move the priority up on the list on the Mekong River. And I also do know that we now have 2 Mekong officers and I just came back from the region and trying to collect information on what actually these countries need. And they can actually tell you more specifically on what they have done. Can I give that my floor to Lonnie? Lonnie, can you come in?
I don't think we have Lonnie added as a speaker
Okay.
on our Zoom here, if that is okay.
That's fine. That's fine. It's okay.
But Lonnie, if you're in the audience and you would like to put your thoughts in the question box, I'll happily share them with the larger audience here. But in the meantime, we have a couple questions here about the ecological and economic impacts of damming in the Mekong for maybe Brian or anyone else to answer. We have one question about the changing conditions in the Mekong affecting global or regional food supply chains. And there's another question about if Chinese investments in the region are affecting the sort of larger economic areas, in the region. You have relatively smaller economies in a place like Laos that are being affected by pretty large inflows of investments from China. So either of those directions. Brian, do you have any thoughts on those?
Yeah, well, Jessica Tietz also asked the question about, can individual states compel China to share transparent data?
Yes.
That's something that the states have been pressing for years. And the reason why our team jumped into this and appealed to the State Department to win a competitive grant to begin the Mekong Dam Monitor was that we saw that there was kind of a dance happening between the lower and the upper countries on the data sharing conversation, that things were moving in the right direction. And we thought with a little bit more evidence, a little bit more of a push, that could quicken the process. And so here's an example of that unilateralism at work, right? Through the U.S. Mekong Partnership, Mekong-U.S. Partnership, the support for the Mekong Dam Monitor and other activities have brought China to now pledge to share dam operations data for all their dams by the end of this calendar year, which is less than a month away. Now, that's a pledge. We haven't seen it happen yet, but we're waiting with bated breath as to whether that will happen. But again, that Mekong River Commission has publicly said that pledge has been made to them. So hold tight to see if that works. And if it has, then it's an example of an impact and success that a transparency initiative supported by the U.S. can achieve. With food issues, I think Koga-san talked about ASEAN and how ASEAN is unable to elevate the river issue up into its agenda. I mean, it really should, because most markets in Southeast Asia consume rice from the Mekong Delta or from Cambodia. just to be clear, Cambodia's rice is the better rice. It's higher quality rice, and Vietnamese purchase Cambodia's rice as opposed to Vietnam's rice, even though Vietnam is one of the top exporters of rice to the region and to the world. If that goes away, that's a regional food crisis. And in Vietnam, again, 50% of its rice crop from the Mekong Delta is sent out for export. So I really think that this is the lack of water, lack of fresh water. In the Mekong Delta, there's salinity intrusion and climate change effects of sea level rise as well that are chipping away at that rice production. It's high time for ASEAN to take up this food security issue as it's related to the Mekong River. Final point. Markets around Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. in the United States also sell rice and fish and other products from the Mekong Basin. I see more and more each year. So this is not just a regional issue for food trade and commerce, it's also a global issue.
Kay, I'd like you to jump in here if possible. What is your view of ASEAN and some outside powers that you discussed, like Japan, maybe even India, their view of the human security issues in the subregion, and any sort of potential future leadership roles that you think could come out of any of those corners?
Yeah. Okay. So yes, the human security issue is important. But just before going into that, I'd like to kind of just build on what Brian just said about the food security. And then ASEAN is slow, and then they are always because of the consensus decision making, and then also like they're actually concerned about their non-interference. So they have to be really sensitive to the other countries. But then they actually they started to take up the agenda of the food security recently. It's not necessarily connected to the Mekong region, but then they actually started to have the certain kind of the declaration, such as the strengthening food security and the nutrition in response to the crisis because of the supply chain, disruption. There are certain countries, because of the COVID-19 and also the Ukraine war, they actually started to concern more about the food security issues. So I think like the linkage between this kind of food security issues to the more like the intra-regional issue is important. And then as Brian said, again, like Mekong is the important issue, so that the ASEAN should actually take up that. For the leadership, from the outside of the powers, I think it is important, but then it's not, I guess, a direct way to actually play a leadership role. They are more they are actually providing the kind of assistant to facilitate the sustainable economic development, and then also the environmental protection. And in that sense, I think Ms. Apshai said the unilateralism also works. And then particularly, I would like to kind of like bring up the project that it's not necessarily unilateralism, but the bilateral cooperation between the United States and Japan actually started to have the JUMP, the project, which is they are trying to facilitate the more kind of power, how do I say, like the clean power, partnership. And what they actually do is the capacity building to the regional states, and then also the economic viability, and then also they facilitate bilaterally, they facilitate their investment. So in that sense, this the JUMP called Japan-US Mekong Power Partnership is a kind of like model case that we could actually use. And then also it could expand the membership in the future as well, so that like they could actually support the regional countries in the clean energy, so that they don't have to necessarily depend on the hydropower for their economic growth or the others. So yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. We have a question that I think will expand this conversation nicely, which is we've been discussing mostly what governments are doing in the Mekong River. But what about civil society and NGOs, which have come up briefly, but I'd like to focus in on those. So a question for anybody on the panel. What are NGOs and civil society organizations doing that is working maybe? And what are some things that those organizations are doing that maybe isn't as effective as they'd like it to be? And how are NGOs or civil society organizations interacting with government entities or international organizations in the region? So anybody, please come up off mute and give me their thoughts. Yeah, Brian, go ahead.
I'll see if others want to answer first.
I think we'd all like to hear your thoughts.
Okay. Well, NGOs are really making a difference in different parts of the basin. Each country has its own approach to governance of NGOs and tolerance of NGOs and participation in the policy and planning process and impacts and improving livelihoods. Thailand is probably the best, if you will, in the region, but Thailand also has a huge record for like assassinations of journalists. So we have to remember that it's dangerous to do NGO work, and even in the best country where civil society can act and be active. There's the example of Niwat Roykal at the Mekong School in the Golden Triangle, who is the 2022 Goldman Prize winner, who brought Chinese engineers to his school and talked about the impacts of a rapids blasting project, where previously, over the previous decades, he could organize thousands of people along the river's course to protest the blasting of those rapids. But it was his bringing and the facilitation of the Thai government, the Chinese government, to bring those stakeholders together to have a consultation that convinced the Chinese to abandon that project. For that, Guti or Niwat Roykal won the Goldman Prize. But you have to remember Goldman Prize winners like Sombat from Laos, who was disappeared and likely murdered in 2013 for his work on sustainability. And since then, Laos has had zero civil society interaction on Mekong sustainability issues. It's a chilling effect. It's very dangerous to be doing this. And earlier this year, a young man was shot in the face and thankfully survived for some of his civil society activism in Laos. Cambodia is a mixed bag. Cambodia, I see some of the best activists working in Cambodia, the most actually impactful, but it's also dangerous, as local Cambodian activists have recently been jailed, particularly young activists from the NGO Mother Nature, jailed to 2-3 year sentences for very innocuous protests. And then Vietnam is becoming the more area of concern with recent jailing of its climate activists. Yesterday, the New York Times ran a front page article about this, the jailing of numerous climate activists in the Mekong. So it's becoming harder at a time when the issues are becoming more complex and there's a greater need for civil society engagement. But I don't see activists and advocates giving up. So it's important to keep up the fight.
So Kay or Apichai, we've talked about opportunities for outside countries, whether it's the United States or Japan or even just non-riverine ASEAN countries to contribute. Is this NGO or civil society space an opportunity for countries to make maybe a safer or more conducive environment for advocacy?
Okay, so may I? Yeah, just quickly there. I guess yes, but from the Japanese perspective, it's more like kind of economic development, and then also as Japan actually is concerned about more on the human security side, human security in terms of the freedom of from wants. That is they try to kind of alleviate the poverty or those kind of like the economic difficulties. So I think the Japanese NGO and also the private sectors are trying to kind of facilitate those kind of like improve the social conditions in the Mekong regions, but not like I mean like the political kind of like movement or like facilitating the human rights protection. Those are not necessarily the kind of main target that the Japanese the NGO, the civil society is actually focusing on.
Yeah, I have kind of add something to both what Brian and also what Kosin was mentioning as well. So I want to echo Brian's point on you see a varieties of responses from these countries, because these countries have varieties of political institutions there as well. Perhaps you can see a lot of work being done with NGOs more effectively, although dangerous, in Thailand, because there's space for NGOs to operate in in contrast to authoritarian regimes in 2 of the countries, and I can actually add all 4 of the countries, right? And how dangerous that could be. So you can see varieties of how effective NGOs are having influence on the Mekong region. The other things I also want to also add to what Kei Koga Sensei just mentioned I want to add the role of business sector as well to this, particularly in the context of Japan as well. So if NGO has some kind of effect on the region, you can imagine by far even more influence are the business sector, particularly Japanese business sector, the role of the Nippon Keidanren, for example, and pushing the government in terms of ODA assistance through the Japanese government to JICA and also through the Asian Development Bank to help develop these east-west economic corridors. So all and trying to improve this supply chain in the region. Those people, those institutions, business institutions also play an important role in influencing the outcomes and also improving, I guess, trying to improve the conditions in the Mekong River as well. And another, I think we shouldn't even looking at just only what the government are doing, but also what these what NGOs are doing vis-a-vis the government, but also what NGOs are doing vis-a-vis the business sector as well.
And Ryan, just a quick two-finger on this, to contrast with China's approach. You know, I have the privilege of also leading a Mekong-US Partnership Track 1.5 policy dialogue process, which brings together NGOs and government leaders under a common platform to come up with policy solutions and programmatic interventions to a range of issues in the Mekong. And what we do is facilitate a very participatory, interactive process, very equal process, equal playing field process for all these stakeholders to come together. And what they produce is really amazing. The recommendations, I've seen recommendations go right to the White House and come out in White House communiques about new programs for Southeast Asia. So it's this bottom-up approach that creates a lot of enthusiasm about the United States actions in the region and activities in the region, as opposed to when we have these conferences, folks often say something like, you know, we'll go to LMC or China's Lansang Cooperation Mechanism, similar activities, conferences, and all we do is read off PowerPoints and then, you know, clap hands and take photographs, and they go out and get us drunk at night and take us shopping. So there's not much participation and feedback loop in that process, and it's a very top-down process. So I think stakeholders in the region can really see the differences in approaches.
Thank you so much. I'd like to close by saying that Apichai's colleague, Lonnie Ding Everson, did come in on the chat to provide his perspective from the US government perspective. So I will read that, which is that the United States has the Friends of the Mekong mechanism, which has multiple countries and institutions working on cooperation and coordination to increase efficiency, to identify and meet programmatic resource gaps, and to avoid redundancy and overlapping activities. That's the US perspective. And there's also working with partner countries like Japan on, as Kay mentioned, the Japan-US Mekong Power Partnership to work on clean energy integration, regional power trade, interconnectivity, and power market reforms in the Mekong subregion. I do think we are just about to run out of time, so I will thank all 3 of our speakers, Brian, Apichai, Kay, for joining us. Kay, especially, I know it is late for you in Singapore, so thank you for putting up with the time zone difference there to join us. I'd also like to thank the audience for listening in. As a reminder, if you enjoyed this event, the best way to ensure future programming like this is to become a member of FPRI. There's information in the chat if you're interested in doing that. If you missed any of the event, you can go to the YouTube link that will be put up in the next 24 hours or so and watch the entirety of the event again. And please fill out the feedback form that is in the chat as well. We really appreciate your thoughts on your feelings on this event and any future events that FPRI might do. So once again, thank you all for joining, and I wish everyone a great rest of their day.